The office door swung open. A man with a self-satisfied smirk strutted in, tossed the termination letter on my desk, and spoke exactly 3 words, effective immediately, no explanation, no emotion. That was Ryan Calloway, the CFO's brother, who'd just become the executioner of my 12-year career at North Star Dynamics. He thought firing me 48 hours before my $75,000 bonus vested was a clever cost-cutting move. He didn't know he'd just triggered the collapse of a $420 million merger and ignited a destruction I'd been quietly preparing for. My name is Claire Dalton, 38 years old, chief engineer and systems architect at North Star Dynamics, or at least I was until 3 minutes ago. I sat there, staring at the termination letter Ryan had thrown on my desk like it was some piece of trash. The corporate letterhead, the sanitized language about restructuring initiatives and strategic realignment. It was all bullshit, and we both knew it. Ryan stood there, hands in his pockets, that infuriating smirk still plastered across his face. He'd only been with the company for 18 months, riding on his brother's coattails as CFO, 3 failed startups behind him, 0 technical knowledge, but somehow he'd landed the title of Vice President of Strategy. The nepotism was so blatant, it would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. "You'll need to clear out your desk by 5 today," he said, checking his Rolex, probably the only successful investment he'd ever made. "Security will escort you out." I didn't respond. I just picked up the pen and signed where indicated. My signature steady and deliberate. He wanted me to argue, to beg, to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I gave him nothing. The silence seemed to unnerve him more than any protest would have. What Ryan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 48 hours wasn't just the time before my $75,000 bonus would vest. It was also the trigger for something far more valuable. That bonus wasn't simply compensation. It was tied to a clause buried deep in my original employment contract, one negotiated 12 years ago when North Star was just a startup operating out of a Denver warehouse. Harold Benton, the company's founder and former CEO, had been a different breed of executive. He understood that the security architecture I was building would become the backbone of everything North Star would eventually sell to banks, government agencies, and Fortune 500 companies, so he'd agreed to my terms if my annual bonus wasn't paid out. Full intellectual property rights to the core system would automatically revert to me. Harold had retired 2 years ago, and clearly, nobody had bothered to read the fine print of my contract since then. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice calm, professional. Ryan's smirk widened. "Oh, one more thing. We'll need all your access badges, company devices, and any backup drives you might have. Can't have proprietary information walking out the door." I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my access badge, company phone, and a USB drive I'd prominently labeled System Backups. I placed them on the desk between us. The USB was empty. I'd formatted it this morning, but the way his eyes lit up when he saw it told me everything I needed to know about his plan. He thought he was being clever, cutting me loose right before the bonus payout, probably planning to take credit for whatever cost savings he could claim to the board. 12 years, I said quietly, standing up and gathering my personal items, a coffee mug, a framed photo of my late border collie, a succulent I'd managed to keep alive despite the fluorescent office lighting. 12 years of building this company's entire technical infrastructure, and this is how it ends. "Business is business," Ryan replied with a shrug. "Nothing personal." I almost laughed. Everything about this was personal. The timing, the method, the messenger. It was all carefully orchestrated to inflict maximum humiliation, but Ryan had made a critical error. He'd assumed I was just another engineer, another replaceable cog in the corporate machine. He hadn't done his homework. As I packed my belongings into a cardboard box, how cliché I thought about all the nights I'd spent debugging code while the sales team celebrated their commissions. The server crashes I'd fixed at 3 a.m. while executives slept soundly in their suburban mansions. The security protocols I'd designed that had prevented 14 major breach attempts in the last year alone. All of it invisible. Thankless work that kept North Star's reputation spotless and its contracts flowing. "The merger documents for Helix Data," I said as I picked up my box. "You might want to have legal review the continuity clauses, specifically Section 47.3. For the first time, Ryan's smirk faltered slightly. "What about it?" "Nothing," I said, heading for the door. "Just friendly advice from a former employee." The walk to the elevator felt longer than usual. Colleagues averted their eyes. News traveled fast in this place. Some looked sympathetic. Others relieved it wasn't them. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the same monotonous drone I'd listened to for over a decade. As the elevator doors closed, I saw Ryan still standing in my former office, frowning at his phone. He was probably trying to look up Section 47.3. He'd find it eventually, the clause that listed me as essential personnel, whose continued employment was a condition of the merger, but by then, it would be too late. The countdown had already begun. The drive home gave me time to reflect on 12 years, 4,380 days. Give or take, that had led to this moment. I remember my first day at North Star like it was yesterday. The company was nothing more than 8 people crammed into a converted warehouse space in Denver's industrial district. The summer heat was brutal, the air conditioning non-existent, and we'd worked on folding tables from Costco because proper desks weren't in the budget. Harold Benton had hired me straight out of MIT. I was 26, idealistic, and burning with ambition to build something revolutionary. While my classmates chased 6-figure starting salaries at Google and Microsoft, I took a $60,000 offer from a nobody startup because Harold let me design the entire security architecture from scratch. No legacy code, no outdated protocols, just a blank canvas and unlimited possibility. Those early days were hell and heaven combined. I'd arrive at 7 in the morning and leave at midnight, sometimes later. My apartment was a 15-minute drive from the warehouse, but some nights, I just slept on the raggedy couch we'd rescued from a garage sale. I lived on energy drinks and takeout Chinese. My fingers permanently stained with ink from whiteboard markers as I mapped out encryption algorithms and data flow diagrams. The breakthrough came 8 months in. I developed a hybrid encryption protocol that was 30% faster than anything on the market while maintaining military-grade security. Harold knew we had gold. Within a year, we'd landed our first government contract. Within 2 years, major banks were lining up. By year 3, we'd moved into the glass tower downtown, and those folding tables were replaced with mahogany conference rooms. But I never forgot those warehouse days. Every line of code I wrote, every system I designed, carried the DNA of those late nights when it was just me, a laptop, and the dream of building something unbreakable. The authentication protocols that protected millions of financial transactions daily, I'd written the first version on a laptop held together with duct tape. The intrusion detection system that had saved 3 Fortune 500 companies from ransomware attacks, I'd conceived it during a 36-hour coding marathon, fueled by nothing but determination and Red Bull. Harold understood this. He knew that I wasn't just an employee. I was the architect of North Star's entire technical foundation. That's why he'd agreed to that unusual clause in my contract. "If this company succeeds, it'll be because of what you build," he told me, sliding the contract across that folding table 12 years ago. "And if they ever forget that, this clause will remind them." The intellectual property provision was his idea. Actually, he'd seen too many engineers get screwed over by companies that built empires on their innovations and then discarded them like yesterday's newspaper. The clause was elegantly simple. My annual bonus wasn't just compensation, it was a licensing fee. As long as North Star paid it, they retained rights to use the core security architecture. Miss the payment, and ownership reverted to me. Harold had even insisted on adding a 48-hour grace period, thinking it would protect the company from administrative errors. Instead, it had become my countdown clock. I pulled into my apartment complex at 2:30 in the afternoon, carrying my pathetic cardboard box of possessions. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was tending to her garden and gave me a concerned look. "Home early today, Claire." "Last day at North Star," I said simply. Her eyes widened. She knew how much that job had meant to me. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I replied, and I meant it. Inside my apartment, I set the box on my kitchen counter and powered up my personal laptop, a custom-built machine with specs that would make the IT department at North Star weep with envy. I navigated to a secure server I'd been maintaining for years, perfectly legal, containing all my personal projects and non-proprietary code I developed in my own time. But more importantly, It contained a simple countdown timer I'd set up years ago. Never thinking I'd actually need it, I'd updated it this morning when I'd seen Ryan's meeting invitation pop up in my calendar at 9:15, a meeting titled simply Strategic Discussion. I'd known what was coming. The timer read 47 hours, 28 minutes, 16 seconds. I opened another terminal window and began typing. Not code this time, but an email I wouldn't send for another 2 days. The recipients were already locked in the legal department at Helix Data, the SEC filing department, and a few tech journalists who'd been following the merger announcement. The subject line was simple: Notification of IP ownership transfer, Northstar Core Systems. The body of the email detailed, in precise legal language, the automatic reversion of intellectual property rights as per my original employment contract. Attached would be the documentation Harold had insisted we file with the Patent Office paperwork that listed me as the inventor and Northstar as the exclusive licensee, contingent upon the terms of my employment agreement. Ryan Calloway thought he'd won. He'd eliminated a senior salary, saved the company $75,000, and probably expected a pat on the back from his brother at the next board meeting. He had no idea he'd just lit a 48-hour fuse that would blow up a $420 million deal. I poured myself a glass of wine, a good bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat back to watch the timer tick down. Somewhere across town, Ryan was probably already celebrating his strategic cost reduction. Let him enjoy it. He had 47 hours left. The beauty of revenge, I've learned, is in the silence. While Ryan celebrated his perceived victory, I maintained absolute radio silence. No angry LinkedIn posts, no bitter goodbye emails to former colleagues, no dramatic exit interviews. I simply vanished from Northstar's ecosystem like I'd never existed at all. But I wasn't idle. Over the next 24 hours, I methodically prepared for what was coming. First, I contacted my lawyer, Jennifer Hartman, who'd been incredulous when I'd first explained the IP clause years ago. "Claire, do you realize what you've negotiated here?" she'd asked. "This is a nuclear option." Now, she was reviewing every piece of documentation, ensuring our position was ironclad. "They actually fired you 2 days before the bonus vested?" Jennifer asked during our video call that evening, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's not just stupid, it's legally suicidal." "Ryan Calloway isn't known for his attention to detail," I replied, sipping my second glass of wine. "Or his intelligence, frankly." The truth about Ryan was even more pathetic than most people knew. His 3 failed startups weren't just failures, they were spectacular implosions of incompetence. The first, a revolutionary food delivery app, had burned through $2 million in funding before anyone realized he'd never secured the necessary permits. The second, something about blockchain-based real estate, collapsed when investigators found he'd been using investor funds for personal expenses. The third never even made it past the PowerPoint stage. His brother, CFO Marcus Calloway, had rescued him each time and finally installed him at Northstar with a made-up title and a corner office. Ryan's actual contribution to the company was less than zero. He actively made things worse every time he opened his mouth. I'd been in meetings where he'd confused encryption with compression, called our clients by the wrong names, and once memorably suggested we should pivot to making our own cryptocurrency during a critical security briefing. But nepotism is a powerful force, and Ryan had survived 18 months of staggering incompetence through sheer familial protection. The merger with Helix Data was supposed to be his redemption arc, his chance to finally prove he could close a major deal. He'd been strutting around the office for weeks, talking about synergies and vertical integration with the confidence of someone who'd just learned those terms from a YouTube video. What he didn't understand, what he was incapable of understanding, was that the merger hinged on Northstar's technology, not its executives. Helix Data wasn't paying $420 million for Ryan's strategic vision. They were paying for the security infrastructure that protected billions in daily transactions, the infrastructure I'd built with my own hands. At 36 hours remaining, I received my first indication that the countdown was working as intended. A former colleague, Sandra from the legal department, texted me. "Claire, what the hell is Section 47.3? Ryan's been screaming at us all morning to find it." I didn't respond, but I smiled. They'd found the continuity clause. Section 47.3 of the merger agreement explicitly stated that certain essential personnel must remain employed by North Star through the completion of the merger, or the deal could be subject to renegotiation or termination. Guess whose name was at the top of that essential personnel list? The beautiful irony was that Ryan himself had probably signed off on that clause without reading it. He'd been so eager to take credit for the merger that he'd rushed through the documentation, trusting that legal would handle the details. Now those details were about to bite him in the ass. At 24 hours remaining, the second domino fell. My phone rang a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again, by the fifth call. I recognized the pattern of desperation and finally answered. "Claire, it's Marcus Calloway." The CFO's voice was strained, none of his brother's false bravado. "We need to discuss your termination." "There's nothing to discuss," I said calmly. "I've been terminated, effective immediately, as your brother so eloquently put it." "There's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I have the termination letter right here, signed by Ryan Calloway, authorized by HR, processed and complete. I've already been escorted from the building." "Claire, please, the merger is no longer my concern. I don't work for North Star anymore, remember?" The silence on the other end was delicious. Marcus was smart enough to understand the implications, even if his brother wasn't. He knew about the continuity clause now, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. He didn't know about the IP clause yet. That would come later. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "Nothing," I said truthfully. "I don't want anything from North Star. You've made your decision, and I've accepted it. I'm moving on with my life." "The $75,000 will not be paid, since I was terminated 48 hours before it vested. Your brother was very clever to time it that way. Saved the company a whole $75,000. I'm sure the board will be thrilled." I hung up before he could respond. Let them sweat. The timer on my laptop read 23 hours, 41 minutes. The USB drive I'd left on my desk was another delicious touch. By now, Ryan had probably handed it over to IT, claiming he'd secured critical company data before I could steal it. They'd find it empty, of course, but not before wasting hours analyzing it for hidden partitions or encrypted files. The paranoia would eat at them. What had I taken? What did I know? What was I planning? The answer was nothing. Everything. And patience. I ordered Thai food, opened another bottle of wine, and settled in to watch the storm I'd created from the eye of the hurricane. Tomorrow, when the timer hit 0, the automated emails would send, the IP ownership would transfer, and Ryan Calloway would learn what it truly cost to save $75,000. The price tag would be $420 million. The 18-hour mark arrived with a flurry of activity I could observe from afar. My phone, which had been relatively quiet overnight, suddenly erupted with notifications, missed calls from North Star numbers, text messages from former colleagues, and even a few LinkedIn connection requests from people I knew were in Ryan's inner circle. I ignored them all, but I monitored the company's public channels with keen interest. The first crack in the facade appeared on a financial blog I followed. "Sources indicate potential complications in North Star Helix data merger," the headline read. The article was sparse on details, but someone had leaked that personnel-related contingencies were causing concern among Helix Data's board. The stock market reacted immediately. North Star shares dipped 3% in pre-market trading. That's when my email system alerted me to something interesting. The automated message I'd scheduled wouldn't send for another 18 hours. But someone at Helix Data had already started digging. Their legal team had sent an inquiry to North Star's legal department, copying several executives, asking for immediate clarification regarding the employment status of key technical personnel as outlined in Section 47.3. I knew this because Sandra, bless her, had quietly forwarded it to my personal email with a single line, "Thought you should see this. They're panicking." The beauty of my position was its perfect legality. I hadn't stolen anything, hadn't sabotaged anything, hadn't violated any NDAs or non-compete agreements. I'd simply been fired. And the consequences of that firing were entirely North Star's problem. The empty USB drive I'd left behind was genius in its simplicity. They were so busy looking for what I might have taken that they hadn't stopped to consider what they were about to lose. At noon, with 12 hours left on my countdown. Ryan tried calling me directly. His name flashed on my phone screen, and I let it ring through to voicemail. His message was a masterpiece of barely controlled rage. "Claire, it's Ryan. We need to talk about this situation you've created. Call me back immediately, or there will be legal consequences." Legal consequences? From the man who just violated a $420 million merger agreement to save $75,000. The irony was almost too perfect. Jennifer called me shortly after. "They've reached out through corporate counsel," she said, amusement clear in her voice. "They're offering to reverse the termination, pay the bonus, and throw in an additional $50,000 as a retention incentive." "Tell them no thank you," I said, watching the timer tick down to 11 hours, 38 minutes. "I've been terminated. The decision was final and effective immediately. I'm exploring other opportunities." "Claire, they're getting desperate. Marcus Calloway himself offered to fly out to meet with you." "I'm not interested in meeting with anyone from North Star. They made their position clear when they had security escort me from the building. The escorting had been particularly insulting. Tom from security, who I'd worked with for 8 years, who I'd helped set up robust building access protocols for, had walked me to my car like I was some kind of criminal. He'd apologized the entire way. But orders were orders. Ryan had wanted to make a show of it, to demonstrate his power. Now that power was turning to ash in his hands. By 3 p.m, with 9 hours remaining, the situation had escalated beyond anything Ryan could control. Helix Data's CEO, Patricia Brennan, had called an emergency board meeting. I knew because Patricia had my personal cell number. We'd met at a cybersecurity conference 2 years ago, and she called me directly. "Claire, I'm going to ask you a simple question, and I need an honest answer," Patricia said without preamble. "Are you still employed by North Star Dynamics?" "No, I was terminated 2 days ago." "And your role in their core security infrastructure?" "I designed and built it from the ground up. Every line of critical code, every security protocol, every encryption algorithm." "I see." Patricia paused. "And is there anything else I should know about your separation from North Star?" This was the moment. I could have told her about the IP clause then, given her advance warning of the hurricane about to hit, but that would have been merciful, and I wasn't feeling merciful. "I'm sure North Star's legal team can answer any questions about contractual matters," I said diplomatically. Patricia was too smart not to hear what I wasn't saying. "Claire, would you be interested in a conversation about opportunities at Helix Data? After this merger situation resolves itself, one way or another." "I'm always open to interesting opportunities," I replied. After we hung up, I realized the true scope of Ryan's miscalculation was becoming clear. Helix Data hadn't just wanted North Star's technology, they'd wanted the mind behind it. And Ryan had handed me to them on a silver platter, severed from North Star with a ticking time bomb attached. At 6 p.m, 6 hours from 0, Ryan finally played his last card. He showed up at my apartment. I watched him through my Ring doorbell camera, standing there in his expensive suit, looking haggard. He'd probably been up all night trying to understand how his brilliant cost-cutting measure had turned into an existential threat to the company. He rang the bell 3 times before speaking to the camera. "Claire, I know you're in there. We need to talk. I'm prepared to apologize." An apology, from the man whose ego was so vast, it had its own gravitational pull. But it was too late for apologies, too late for negotiations, too late for anything but consequences. I activated the speaker. "Ryan, you have 5 seconds to leave my property before I call the police for trespassing." "Claire, please." 5. "The merger." 4. "I'll resign. I'll fucking resign if that's what you want." 3. He left at 2, but not before kicking my door frame in frustration. I saved the video. It might be useful later. The timer on my laptop read 5 hours, 52 minutes. Soon, Ryan would learn that some mistakes can't be undone, some bridges can't be unburned, and some people can't be discarded without consequence. The price of his arrogance was about to come due. The final hours before 0 were when the cracks became chasms, at 10:30 that evening, with 90 minutes left on my countdown. The news broke wide open. TechCrunch published an article titled, "North Star Helix Data Merger in Jeopardy Over Personnel Clause Violation."